Aloha kako. If you don't know already, I'm Porscha of the Fountain. And I am working on a project that I've decided to call in my class Moʻolelo Moments. And it is symbolic in all sorts of ways. It is really, I think, an important journey that I'm taking in now, sort of not only my pedagogy with students, my andragogy, but also sort of looking at the role that our institution has in higher education for students. Because increasingly, it is followed up by, we're gonna say we do these things, and that the action part is always, where it sort of falls apart. Who's responsible for this, and where is this going to happen? This project is just some sort of way of me trying to be honest and to provide some stability for my students around that, saying these things that we're going to do, and here's how we're doing it. So by trade, institutionally, I'm acknowledged as a composition and literature kumu, and my job, for all sakes and purposes, is to facilitate the reading, critical thinking, and writing skills of college-level students. We all know, that's just one part of the pie. There are so many other things within our role that we do. Whether we are a counselor, an advisor, a staff member, a teacher, an administrator, there are other things that sort of come into that. And definitely, all of these skills are necessary for students. And I've always found that my role on this campus has been an inclusive role, whether I'm teaching English 100, which has every single student and their ranges, and even in my literature class, which I will be talking mostly about in my presentation today, it is really about the inclusivity of the environments that show up in my classroom and that the people that I work with that allow me to do my work and to be, present on my campus. I have taught both of these courses for about 15 years, so a lot of people go, you could do it on autopilot, and I go, no. If you're really into it, you just can't phone it in. And that's, I think, the danger in sort of doing things for a really long time is that people become complacent. But it's my students oftentimes that force me to explore and do things in new ways. And then, of course, the great modeling we've seen here with our colleagues, learning from each other that allow us to do that work. But this presentation is one way for me to help to conceptualize some of the things that have been bubbling up since the pandemic. So the course I'm going to be talking about today is English 272M. It is Literature of Hawaii, Oceania, and Asia. This is what I'd like to call sort of my bebe. It is, my entire academic training has focused on the areas of this course. The interesting thing, I actually took this course as a student from my previous mentor, Gail Harada. So I took the course, I experienced the course, and then she bestowed it to me, which I felt very honored to be able to receive this course and be able to teach it. It is an interesting course because it is dealing really with literature, but if one begins to start to unpack what all of that means, we are talking about an expansive geographical region, let alone looking at the cultural components that are attached to each of those distinctive areas. This is a brief blurb that I have on the screen for you that talks a little bit about the goal of the course. It is focused on looking at the interaction between and among the people and cultures of these regions. It is an intersection course. It is giving Native Hawaiians a primary role in sort of the study of it, but then looking how Native Hawaiians connect with the rest of Oceania, and then of course looking at how that in turn connects with Asia. So it is, e Hoʻi na Wai is my course. It is just like, I live it and breathe it, so that's why it was so good to be in this experience, because it allowed me a chance to kind of get a refresh and a revitalization, because I live it, I teach it, and then to see it through a different lens and a new lens was very, very refreshing for me. The course is also imbued with themes that are really important for students to understand, and it helps give them not only a new vocabulary, but it helps them understand the sort of connectedness of perhaps struggle. Oftentimes, many of the struggles or conflicts they are experiencing is very personal, and then when they read about it in another culture or in another framework, it's more uplifting, not to say like, wow, they're struggling too, but that they see that their sort of conflict or their struggle is relatable. And that's a really big part of the course for many of my students. It also fulfills many graduation requirements, So it is becomes increasingly a very popular course. It is writing intensive, it is an HAP, and it is a DL, or diversification in literatures. Because of that, my population runs the gamut. So I have students that are your typical liberal arts students, but I also have pre-nursing students. I also have students that are looking to get into animation or creative media. I have students that are sort of, in potentially looking at CTE programs, but also sort of dabbling in the liberal arts world. So it is vast. And their level of preparation in terms of approaching literature is also vast. Because many of them go, oh, miss, I never read a book. We're gonna read one this semester. So that's also the component. As I mentioned, the preference is given to Native Hawaiians. We spend about 2/3 of the course studying Hawaii, and that is because it's an HAP course. It's a requirement of that, but it also provides a really important framework, which you'll see as I'll get to in the presentation, about how much, as we've mentioned here already today, how little our students know about this place and about their history. Okay, so the course content, because it is literature, you can't really enter into the world of understanding a story without understanding its history, its politics, and some of the dynamics that are in play being used by an author. So I have to do a lot of setup. I have to do a lot of sort of presenting things as a way so that students can understand it. Because this course had to move online because of the pandemic, they get a lot of this sort of juxtaposition of things. So they'll get things like, they'll learn about Puʻunani Burgess's sort of story as she presents her poem, Choosing My Name, which many students, they absolutely love that poem. They read that poem and they're just like, this is me. She's my person. I'm like, Puʻunani does that. She's very accessible. She's an amazing woman. And then they get a little bit of history about Hawaii Creole English or Pidgin. And they know that it has something to do with plantations and those sorts of things, but they don't always get sort of the behind of that. Like, why is that? Why was that sort of present? It also allows a chance for students to talk about their family histories. Why are you sort of ethnically diverse? Why are these sort of components for you a part of your family, your practices? And then I also have a colleague's poem, Sage Uilani Takahiro, her poem on War Zone. War Zone is it's totally done in Pidgin, and students often go like, oh, what is that? Like, they've never seen Pidgin in text, and it kind of freaks them out. But I'm like, did you read it out loud? And they go, oh. So it's a really interesting poem because it is speaking to sort of the idea of, it takes place in Wailuku on Maui, and it presents this sort of going out for a night of drinking and sort of libations, and then what happens when they encounter Jenna Bush, which is a very interesting encounter of these local girls from Maui coming, and that intersection of politics and history, America versus the United States versus Hawaii, and those sorts of dynamics that sort of erupt in this poem. And students have a very interesting time sort of trying to process what all of that means, because they've seen it. They've seen those interactions, but they haven't really been able to put a name on it. Like, what are those things that are happening? So as you can see, the examples that I give them are very contemporary. They're modern texts dealing with oftentimes deeply historically rooted problems related to identity, related to sort of the politics of communities coming together. So I have to provide a lot of context, as I mentioned. That comes in the form of giving them short readings or videos, things about like the Great Mahele or the 1893 illegal overthrow. Some of them know that happened, but they don't really understand the components of that. We talk a lot about actually Act 57, which is the 1896 language ban, which is often called a language ban, but it's really a preferential treatment to use English in the classroom. And if you taught a class in any other language, you weren't funded. So in essence, it was a language ban without calling it a language ban. When we talked about what that means in terms of learning and education and the importance of language. We talk about annexation and then, of course, cultural appropriation. That comes up in a lot of the things that we read about, well, where do you see Native Hawaiian things? How is it represented? that definitely gets us into the text that we eventually read. This is the book that students read in the class. It's Christiana Kahakawila's short story collection. This is Paradise. Students, when they get into this book, they do enjoy it, and I'm so happy to teach it. The reason I select this book is because it is not an Oahu-centric text. It's a story that takes place on every island. And it's about, I think, sort of decentralizing the Oahu narrative for a lot of local students, is because now that I teach my class online, I have students from Molokai, I have students on the Big Island. So that is, I think, is important for them to see their places in text. It helps sort of, I think, create this identity that, you know, there's someone writing about my place and that I'm trusting that person to tell that story. The other thing that the context stuff does is that we have to foster engagement in these other topics that come up related to Native Hawaiian identity. We read about blood quantum and the complications of blood quantum as it's related to Hawaiian homelands and what that does in the modern context, because we also are looking at sort of those issues around what does that mean to be Native Hawaiian today and how does one identify themselves. We look at family systems, the practices of hanai, and also familial roles. We read some social science texts that help understand or explain the histories around Hawaiian family roles. And then we spend about 2 weeks on the kumu lipo as a means of students understanding the Hawaiian creation chant, but also the importance of not only symbolism, but this idea of duality and how the Native Hawaiian worldview approaches their understanding of space, their understanding of the relationships. So all of this was working super awesome in my classes when I taught this in person, because culture to me is something that's very personal. And when you move this content online, it's very hard to have those conversations. It's very hard sometimes, I think, for people to feel safe to share things. So I am super interested in Nadine's numbers. I'm like, how does that happen? We'll have to talk. But I do also feel that there's a responsibility for what you're putting out into sort of the ether. And that doesn't mean that I don't trust my online students. I think my online students are great and they're dealing with the exact same struggles my face-to-face students had. But there is definitely a different component that just cannot be reached online when I teach my class. So previously, I used to do a very extensive undergraduate research project in my classes for this literature course. So the last 4 weeks of this semester, we would sort of stop the literature and we would spend 4 weeks in which the students got to research a mo'olelo of their choosing and apply any sort of lens they wanted to it. It could be a social science lens, it could be a health lens, it could be whatever they wanted, but it had to be a mo'olelo of their choosing, and it was amazing. For 4 years I did this, and it was like, it like kind of created this synergy on its own, because it was their passion project. And it still sort of went back to what the course was trying to achieve around these intersections. So this first example is a student looking at Pele and her sort of story and juxtaposing it against a Korean story by a goddess named Hwangneung and looking at the parallels around that. Amazing projects. The other one is Ku and his gift of ulu. And this student was looking at much more of the biological components attached to the ulu tree and how that sort of, as a famine food, was vital not only for the people of Hawaii, but across the Pacific, and the nutrient properties of ulu and how that's beneficial. So I couldn't do this when we moved online. It's just, one, it's labor intensive in person, and I just couldn't imagine how that was gonna work online, because I weigh heavily on our Hawaiian resource librarian to help support students to do this. And I didn't want to burden, that was just an extra task to ask of people to do for me for this class. So I had to abandon it and regroup. This was in the fall of 2020. I had to regroup. And so I started to go, okay, how can I imbue the course still with these sort of meaningful experiences for students that would allow them to still engage in sort of Hawaiian values and Hawaiian stories. So it started with every week we have an olelo no iau, or we have some sort of song or some sort of meaningful sort of connection that can be added to the weeks as a way to set us up. And this was working relatively good. I felt like my students had a connection to it. And then it started to change. Like there was just something missing in the weekly sort of interactions, and I just noticed that my students' comments were changing. I'm not sure if it was just an encounter. There's very many variables to sort of figure out or depict what exactly was happening for my students, but it kept coming up over and over. So you can go ahead and take a look at what they're writing. This is just a very small sample of some of the encounters they were having. Like I said, I don't know if it was because it was online or if it was because it was, pandemic, but there was definitely this sort of challenge my students were encountering. So the first one, both of these are coming from around the same time in the semester, around week 5, when we read Kealoha's poem Dichotomy and Haunani K. Trask, a section of her chapter From a Native Daughter. Both of those they're poets, they're scholars, but they're dealing with being Native and the challenges of being Westernized. I know I'm Native, but I am trained in a Western sort of manner to deal with the world. And many of my students, many of my Native Hawaiian students, Pacific Islander students are struggling with this, like, I don't know how to be. What does this mean for me in this space? And it's also true of my local students. Like, I never knew this happened. Like, why don't I know this? I knew I learned this in 4th grade. I went to the Big Island, I went to Bishop Museum, I did this. Why didn't I hear about this ever again in my academic experience? Why didn't I get it in high school? Why did I have to take this class in order to be, awakened to this again? So I was having a really hard time trying to, sort of recover my students sort of, it's not your fault. This is how it works. Now it's up to you. Now that you know, what are you going to do about it? So I've been thinking about how do I know I can't recreate that undergraduate research project in an online modality. At least I haven't figured it out yet. Maybe that's my pie in the sky goal. But I know I definitely need to bring in story better. I know I need to have students better interact with Moʻolelo as a way for them to see sort of the practices of Native Hawaiian ideas and see sort of how it works. So Moʻolelo will allow me to showcase Native Hawaiian storytellers, and there are many. I mean, depending on the translation versions that you want to look at, there are many different storytellers that you can look at. And the more and more I learn about the importance of learning through stories, about how it helps and how our brains react to stories so much more differently than we think about charts or numbers or, no offense, math people. But stories, that's why when Nadine said, I'm going to bring in Moʻolelo, I said, yes, you are. You're going to bring in Moʻolelo. It also is a way for me to present Hawaiian meaning and values in a way that is sort of framed within a Hawaiian structure of a story. And then it also allowed me to foster connection to childhood stories. We've all had these stories when we were little, and then they kind of go away. And I'm like, why do they go away? They should still be here. No matter what culture you come from, no doubt you learn about your people's stories. So it's important to kind of bring that back again. Just recently, UH Press put out a new book. I went to their book launch. It was amazing. It is by 2 Native Hawaiian. One is a Lilo Hawaii professor, and the other is a drama professor. But they are looking at the importance of Moʻolelo as a foundation of Hawaiian knowledge. They use this really interesting breakdown of mo'o and lelo, mo'o being succession, right, the sort of patterning of that, and olelo being words, right? The genealogy of one's sort of understanding of self often comes through story. The other part that I thought was really important to kind of be reminded of is like, this is how we learn about culture. This is how we learn about who we are. It's often through, kukulu, these pillars of knowledge, and they are rooted in our stories from every culture. They have them. So my mo'olelo moments, my goals, to share Native Hawaiian stories rooted in values and systems of knowledge. And sneakily, because it is an English class, I gotta get it in there somehow, it'll be another chance for students to practice literary elements. As a way for them to sort of see how in this story, using sort of things like symbol or protagonist or conflict, as a way for them to see in this Hawaiian framework, there are also these other literary elements that can be applied. Erica Diaz, our Hawaiian resource librarian, has been ever so gracious. She is so resourceful. But her and I have started just going in and sort of looking through all of the different anthologies to figure out what are some stories that we can use. So this is my short list. I'm probably only going to use some of those, but I'll use the first one, Ku and Ulu, which is a very accessible story if you don't know it, as a way for you to sort of see how this would work in my literature class. Are we familiar with the gift of Ulu? Maybe? Okay, you can advance it and we can play a little bit if it'll...
This is Moʻolelo moment number 1, the gift of Ku. The great gods sometimes took the form of men and walked about our islands. So it was that Ku married a woman of Hawai and settled down as a common man to farm the land and raise a family. Years passed and famine came. All up and down the land, people were sick with hunger. Ku's children begged for food and their mother wept. "I can get food for them," the husband said, "but it will mean a long, long journey." "You will return?" she asked him anxiously. "If I go, I never shall return," he answered. She clung to him. "Oh, do not go," she said. But when the children cried and begged for food, she came to him again. "I cannot bear to see them suffer," was all she said. Ku understood. That evening, he called her to come out into the yard.
Ku sacrifices himself in order to feed his family. It's a pivotal story because it does sort of handle a lot of the sort of familial roles. What is the role of a parent? And it also functions, if you get to the end of the story, it sort of shows this idea not only of kuleana, but this idea of what is the privilege of being a part of this family. The end of the story shows that the family is fed first and secured, and then they are shared. They share their makana. They are able to share what they can give to others. And it is an important story that has many multidisciplinary lenses, not only for English. But I would like to be able to share the sort of auditory components of the story, the textual version of the story, and then have just a quick series of questions to have them sort of process what it is that they're seeing in these stories. And also a way for me, as I said, to sneak in those literary terms, which they'll have to use anyways in their essays and other forms of writing. But that is how I'm trying to sort of, get back to the stories, get back to the way that maybe things used to be, where we could sort of spend more time here. Okay, so my next steps. Determine how I want to house these Mo'olelo moments. I'm looking at Edpuzzle as a potential way to do that. Kind of works, but the text doesn't really show up too well on an Edpuzzle. It's kind of fuzzy, kind of blurry. So it may just end up being like a Google form, which is, I don't know, maybe not the best way, but I'm still shopping. I need to decide on the 5 mo'olelo that I would like to share in my fall class. And I do have a nice list started, but it's gonna be, there's definitely probably going to be Halumoa, looking at Waikiki, but also some other ones that are maybe a little bit more dynamic. And not only using me reading them, because that's not too much of that now. We'll have other video forms of ones that are already out there. And then I need to develop questions that I think the students will engage with. And then last but not least, encourage others to use mo'olelo in their classes and find creative ways to do that. I got super excited thinking about Jamie and then Nadine about somehow creating some sort of mo'olelo repository as a way for us to sort of think about what are some stories that, oh, I learned about this in my other class. I want to see how I can apply it here. Because there are definitely accessible stories, I think, that we can all use and connect with that will help sort of spur these sort of ideas for students. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.